A city bus on the bridge above hissed to a stop. The sound of its failing air breaks a sharp, pressurized sigh. It was the sound of a broken hydraulic line. Suddenly, Jack wasn't in Baltimore. He was in the dry, choking heat of forward operating base, the air thick with dust and diesel fuel. He saw Mikey with his booming laugh and the photo of his pregnant wife, taped to the dashboard of their recovery vehicle. They were supposed to be checking the winch. The hiss, the sudden, terrible snap of the cable. Jack hadn't been close enough to be hurt, only close enough to watch, helpless, as the multi-ton component slipped, crushing Mikey in an instant. The memory released him, and the cold of the Baltimore overpass rushed back in. The cold in Baltimore was a thief. It didn't just bite. It stole. It stole the warmth from your bones, the feeling from your fingers, and, if you let it, the very hope from your soul. It was a damp, creeping cold that rolled off the Patapsco River, carrying the ghostly smell of salt and rusted industry. Jack Sawyer felt it deep in the old injury in his right shoulder, a persistent, dull throb that kept time with his heartbeat. Huddled against a massive concrete pylon beneath the I-895 overpass, he was shielded from the worst of the wind, but nothing could stop the dampness that seemed to live in the very cement he sat on. At 42, he was a man built tall and solid, but layers of worn clothing, a faded black canvas jacket over a thick hoodie, blunted his edges. His face was hidden beneath a rough, patchy beard, and his dark hair, streaked with premature gray at the temples, was long and unkempt. His eyes, however, held a deep, quiet intensity that seemed out of place in the grim, gray landscape. Pressed firmly against his left side, absorbing and returning a sliver of precious warmth, was Bear. Bear was a German shepherd, 8 years old, with a thick coat of black and tan that seemed to absorb the dim light. He was a large dog, powerful in the chest and shoulders, but his demeanor was one of profound calm. His intelligent, dark eyes watched the slow-moving traffic on the overpass above, his ears twitching at the sound of tires on wet asphalt, but his body remained relaxed. He was a living, breathing anchor tethered to Jack. Jack noticed the raw, red skin on one of Bear's front paws. The frost was getting to him. They couldn't stay out here much longer. Jack's gaze was fixed on the river, but he wasn't seeing the choppy, gray water. He was pulled back into the past, to the memory that truly held him underwater. The death was a tragedy, sudden and violent. The cold anchor that held Jack at the bottom of the river was what came after. The memory of a sterile room, the scent of industrial cleaner, and the face of a superior, Captain Richard Vance. Vance was a man with a jawline like granite and eyes that held no light, a man who saw the world in terms of assets and acceptable losses. Jack, still in shock, had filed his report. Faulty hydraulics, substandard parts. He'd mentioned the other complaints, the ones that had been ignored. Vance had listened, his expression unchanged. Then he produced his own report. Operator error. It said, "Sir, Jack had protested, his voice hoarse. The ground was unstable. The hydraulics were—" "The ground was fine, Sawyer," Vance had said, his voice quiet but absolute. "Your report is mistaken. It was a tragic accident caused by Mikey's failure to follow safety protocols. That is the official finding. But, sir, the contract with that supplier is vital to our operational readiness." Vance cut in, his eyes turning to ice. "We will not jeopardize that over a single unfortunate incident. You are dismissed, Sergeant." Jack had stood there, his insides turning to stone. Mikey was buried, and so was the truth. It was a cover-up, clean and simple, designed to protect a lucrative government contract. The system he had sworn his life to, the honor he had built himself around, had evaporated in that sterile room. His discharge, which came 6 months later, felt less like an ending and more like a long, slow fall. And he had been falling ever since. A low whine pulled Jack back to present. Bear had shifted, pushing his cold, wet nose insistently under Jack's glove. The dog's eyes were fixed on him, full of a patient understanding that asked for nothing but presence. "I'm here, boy," Jack murmured, his voice rough. He scrubbed the dog's thick fur. "I'm okay." He was lying. Their meager shelter under the bridge was no longer secure. A white municipal truck had pulled up earlier, and a man in a thick, city-issued coat had approached. He wasn't unkind, just firm. "Fella, I'm sorry," the man had said, looking from Jack to Bear. "New directive. We've got to clear this area. Liability. You can't stay here." Jack had simply nodded, the familiar, hot shame washing over him. Asterisk another order. Another displacement. Asterisk he knew how to follow orders. He packed his few belongings, a rolled-up sleeping bag, a small cookpot, a waterlogged tarp, into the battered shopping cart that held his life. Now, with the sun beginning to dip and the temperature plummeting, they were exposed. He had $68 in his pocket. That was 3 days of food, for if Bear ate less. "Well, Bear," Jack said, standing up and stretching, his shoulder protesting. "Guess we're moving." Bear stood instantly, shaking the frost from his coat, ready. Jack pushed the wobbly cart onto the sidewalk, his mind racing. Shelters were full, and most wouldn't take Bear. He would never abandon the dog. They were a single unit. His eyes scanned the skyline across the river. Looming against the fading, bruised light like the skeleton of a forgotten giant was the Chesapeake Steelworks. The mill had been shuttered since the late 1980s, a massive monument to a dead industry. It was acres of rusting metal, broken glass, and concrete canyons. It was also, Jack knew, incredibly dangerous and strictly off-limits. Locals avoided it, whispering that it was haunted by the ghosts of displaced workers. But it was a roof. It took them nearly an hour to cross the bridge and navigate the crumbling service roads that led to the mill's perimeter. The chain-link fence was high, but time had been kind to them. Near a collapsed loading dock, a section of the fence had rusted through at the bottom, leaving a gap just wide enough to slip through. Jack pushed the car as far as he could, then unfastened his pack and the sleeping bag. He would have to leave the cart behind. He and Bear slipped through the gap into profound, echoing silence of the dead factory. The main foundry floor was a graveyard of machinery. Moonlight slanted through shattered skylights, illuminating hulking, silent shapes. It was colder inside than it had been on the street, the metal radiating a deep, penetrating chill. "This way," Jack whispered, moored himself into the dog. Bear moved beside him, silent as a shadow, his head high and alert. Jack remembered this place from a brief, desperate scouting mission months ago. He bypassed the main floor, heading toward a smaller, separate structure he had seen near the old administrative block. He found it, a small brick building set apart from the main works. The sign above the door, barely legible, read security office. The wooden door was thick, and the lock had been broken long ago, but the door itself was still on its hinges. Jack pushed it open with a sound of grinding, rusted metal. "At Bonds Unspoken, we believe every story between a human and their animal companion deserves to be heard. If you agree, please like, share, and subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you can join us every time another Bond speaks louder than words." Inside, it was pitch black. Jack fumbled for the small flashlight on his keychain. The beam cut through decades of dust. It was a single room, maybe 10 feet by 10. A heavy steel desk sat against one wall, a moldering chair beside it. But the window, though filmed with grime, was not broken. The roof, miraculously, seemed intact. The floor was concrete, littered with dead leaves that had blown in under the door. But it was dry. It was safe. Jack dropped his pack against the wall and let out a breath he felt he had been holding since morning. The air was stale, smelling of old plaster and decay, but it was still. Bear sniffed every corner of the small room, his claws making soft clicking sounds on the concrete. Finally, he returned to the pack, circled twice, and lay down with a heavy sigh, resting his head on his paws, his eyes closing. He was home. Jack sat on the floor, his back against the cold wall, and placed a hand on Bear's flank. The dog was his anchor, the only thing that kept him from drifting away completely. Here, in the frozen heart of the Chesapeake Steelworks, they had found a small, cold harbor. The security office at the Chesapeake Steelworks was a refuge, but it was not a home. When the weak, gray light of morning filtered through the grime-caked window, it revealed the stark reality of their situation. The shelter was dry, but it was as cold inside as it was out. Jack woke stiffly, his bones aching, the old pain in his shoulder a sharp reminder of the life he'd left behind. Bear was already awake, sitting patiently, his breath pluming in the frigid air. The dog's intelligent eyes were fixed on Jack, his tail unmoving. It was a look Jack knew well. It was hunger. Jack's stomach clenched in response. He reached for his pack and checked their supplies. The inventory was grim: half a bag of kibble for Bear and the last 2 protein bars for himself. He had $68 and some change folded into a small plastic bag in his pocket, the last of his disability payment from 2 weeks ago. It wasn't enough for a room, and it was barely enough to eat for a few more days. But it was too much to simply sit on. He remembered a damp flyer he'd picked up at a bus stop days ago, an advertisement he had glanced at and dismissed. He fished the crumpled paper from his jacket pocket. Bayview storage. It read, ** delinquent unit auction. Cash only. ** It was a desperate gamble. What do you think, boy? Jack murmured, showing the flyer to Bear. The dog sniffed the paper and sneezed. It's a chance, Jack said, his voice firm. It's the only one we've got. He divided the last of the kibble for Bear and ate one of the protein bars, the taste like chalk in his mouth. As he chewed, his mind drifted back, pulled by the familiar ache of memory. The present faded, and he was once again in the dust-choked air of a foreign land. He was Sergeant Jack Sawyer, 35 years old, his body still strong, his posture straight. He was responsible for his men. Among them was Corporal Mikey Reynolds, a man with a laugh that could cut through any tension. Mikey was always talking about his wife, Sarah, and their unborn daughter. "Promise me you'll meet my girl, Sarge," he'd said once, sharing his last protein bar with Jack during a long watch. Back in the present, Jack's knee cracked as he stood up, the sound loud in the silent office. He secured the small office as best he could, and they slipped back out into the frozen city. As they walked, the memory tightened its grip. That day, they were tasked with inspecting a winch system on one of the Hercs. The vehicle was crucial for moving disabled equipment. "I'm telling you, Sarge," Mikey said, wiping grease from his hands. "The hydraulics on this thing are junk. The parts are substandard. We've filed complaints." Jack nodded, his eyes scanning the machinery. "I know, Mikey, but command says to make it work. We don't have a choice." A city bus hissed nearby on the street, and Jack flinched, the sound pulling him halfway out of the memory. Bear pressed against his leg, sensing his tension. Jack kept walking, the flyer feeling heavy in his pocket. He was back in the dust. He heard the hiss of the hydraulic system, a sound that was becoming all too familiar. Then the sharp, explosive crack. The cable whiplashed. The multi-ton winch mechanism lurched violently. "Mikey, get back!" Jack shouted, but was too late. The winch slipped from its mounting, crashing down. Dust billowed. When it cleared, Jack saw the horrific result. Mikey was pinned, his body broken. The life had already left his eyes. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding. The laughter, the talk of his daughter, the picture on the dashboard, all gone in an instant. The memories shifted to the aftermath. Jack was in Captain Richard Vance's office. The room was sterile, cold. "Sergeant Sawyer," Vance began, his voice calm but devoid of warmth. "I've reviewed your report. You claim the accident was due to equipment failure." "Yes, sir," Jack said, standing at attention. "The hydraulic line was defective. We've had issues with the supplier before." Vance nodded slowly, then slid a folder across the desk. "This is the official report. It concludes that the accident was a result of operator error. Corporal Reynolds failed to follow established safety protocols." Jack's blood ran cold. "Sir, that's not true. The ground was unstable and the hydraulics—" "The ground was fine, Sawyer," Vance interrupted, his eyes turning to ice. "Your report is mistaken. The official finding is that this was a tragic accident caused by Corporal Reynolds' negligence. The contract with that supplier is vital to our operational readiness. We will not jeopardize it over a single unfortunate incident. Do you understand?" Jack felt a rage building inside him, hot and sharp. "Sir, with all due respect, Mikey was a good soldier. He didn't deserve this. His family doesn't deserve this lie." Vance's expression didn't change. "This isn't about what he deserved. It's about what's best for the mission. The matter is closed. You are dismissed, Sergeant." Jack stood there for a long moment, his fists clenched. He wanted to argue, to fight, but he knew it was useless. The system had spoken. Mikey was buried, and the truth was buried with him. Back in the present, Jack blinked, the memory receding like a tide. He was standing on a street corner in Baltimore, bear pressed against his leg, the cold seeping through his clothes. He looked down at the flyer in his hand, clutching it so tightly the ink smudged on his glove. He looked down at Bear, who gazed up at it with unwavering loyalty. "We're not going to let that happen again, boy," Jack whispered, his voice low and determined. "We're going to find a way out of this." $70 for a chance to prove Vance wrong. But deep down, he wondered if he was just lying to himself again. The ghost of Mikey Reynolds and the cold eyes of Captain Vance were always with him, a constant reminder of how quickly everything could be taken away. Jack stood on the industrial edge of Baltimore, the Bayview storage flyer crumpled in his hand. "Tools," he muttered to Bear. "Furniture? What do you think is in there, boy?" The dog just leaned against his leg, offering silent support. The facility was a sprawling complex of identical beige buildings with bright orange roll-up doors. A small crowd of about 20 people was gathered near the main office. Most were men with pickup trucks and empty cargo vans, looking warm, professional, and confident. Jack, in his worn canvas jacket with Bear at his side, felt immediately out of place. He pulled his collar tighter and stayed at the back of the group. A man in a bright yellow vest over a heavy coat stepped out, holding a clipboard. This was Sam Higgins, the auctioneer. He had a fast, rhythmic voice that cut to the cold air, wasting no time on pleasantries. "All right, folks, welcome to Bayview. You know the rules. You look, you don't touch. Cash only. If you win it, you have 48 hours to clear it out. Let's get started." He motioned to a worker who cut the lock on the first unit. The metal door rattled as it rolled upward. Jack watched for the next hour as his hope dwindled. The professionals were fast. They would shine bright flashlights into units, make near-instant calculations, and the bidding would start. A unit filled with what looked like antique furniture went for $750. Another pack with tools and machinery climbed to $1,200. Jack didn't even bother watching. He just stroked Bear's head, feeling the warmth of the dog's fur under his glove, and tried to ignore the growing pit of failure in his stomach. Finally, Sam Higgins moved to the very last unit in the row, separate from the others. "All right, folks, last one for the day. Unit 3B, tenant delinquent for 8 months. Looks like a backload. We're cutting the lock now." A worker snapped a heavy padlock with bolt cutters. The sound was sharp and final. Sam and the worker both strained to pull the rattling door upward. It stuck, then flew open with a groan of protesting metal. The professionals shined their lights inside, held their gaze for less than 10 seconds, and then scoffed. One by one, they turned and began walking back toward their trucks. "Okay, folks, what do we have here?" Sam Higgins chanted, trying to keep the energy up. Jack stepped forward to see what the others had rejected. Unit 3B was a pit. It was 10 feet deep and packed with sagging cardboard boxes, their sides dark and soft with mildew. A broken floor lamp lay on its side. Black plastic trash bags were piled in one corner, some split open to reveal stained, moldy clothing. The smell that washed out was a sickening mix of damp paper, decay, and time. It was worthless. "Let's start the bidding at $50. Sam called out to the retreating crowd. No one turned. "Come on, folks. $70 for moldy laundry and rat droppings. Do I hear 20? Absolute silence. Sam sighed, annoyed. He looked around, his eyes landing on the only person still standing there. "You with the dog. $20. It's all yours," Sam said. "Just wanted to be done." Jack's heart was pounding. It was junk, but it was something. He thought of the $68 in his pocket. "I'll give you 50, Jack said, his voice surprisingly steady. A man who had been walking away paused. 60, the man called out, probably just for the sport of it. Jack's stomach tightened. 70, he said, the word coming out faster than he intended. It was everything. The other man laughed and waved his hand in dismissal. $70 it is. Sam Higgins shouted, relieved. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman with the dog for $70. Jack walked forward, his hand trembling slightly as he pulled the wadded-up bills from his pocket. He was now completely broke. Sam took the cash and handed him a carbon copy receipt. "She's all yours. You got 48 hours to clear it out," Sam said, not unkindly. He glanced at Bear. "Good-looking dog. Good luck to you." The auctioneer and the last of the buyers left. The lot was silent, save for the wind whistling around the corner of the building. It was just Jack, Bear, and the black, gaping rectangle of Unit 3B. "Well, boy," Jack whispered, his throat dry. "Let's see what we bought." He stepped inside, and the full force of the smell hit him. It was overwhelming. He pulled his flashlight from his pack and shined it around. It was worse than he thought. The cardboard boxes were so damp they were disintegrating. When he touched one, it simply collapsed, revealing a sodden mass of old newspapers and magazines fused together into a solid, moldy brick. He spent the next hour digging, his hope turning to cold, hard despair. There were no tools. There was no furniture save for a three-legged stool and a rusted metal shelf. It was just the accumulated, forgotten refuse of a life, moth-eaten blankets, cracked dishes, yellowed paperbacks that fell apart in his hands. Then his fingers brushed against something cold and metallic, a tarnished silver locket, heart-shaped, tangled in a pile of mildewed rags. For a moment, his heart leapt. He pried it open. Empty, just another broken thing. It was nothing. He had spent his last $70 on garbage. The weight of his failure pressed down on him, heavier than the Baltimore cold. He had failed Bear. He had failed himself. He was right back where Captain Vance had left him. A man whose judgment was worthless, a man who had lost everything. He slid down the wall and sat on the cold concrete floor, burying his face in his gloves. He felt the old, familiar shadow of his trauma wrap around him. He was pulled from the darkness by a sound, a persistent, whining scratching. He looked up. Bear was at the very back of the small, 10-foot-deep unit. The back wall was covered in a single large, cheap-looking sheet of plywood, stained and peeling from moisture. Bear was standing on his hind legs, his nose pressed firmly against the wood, sniffing intently. He whined again, then dropped to all fours and began to scratch at the base of the panel. "Bear, stop," Jack commanded, his voice tired and empty. "Leave it. It's just rats, boy. There's nothing back there for us." Bear paused, looked back at Jack with frustrated expression, and then turned and scratched again, harder this time, letting out a low, insistent huff. This wasn't the excited scratch of a dog chasing prey. It was focused. It was deliberate. Jack sighed, the weight of his despair making every movement feel heavy. He owed the dog his attention. It was the least he could do. All right. I see it. What is it?" he said, pushing himself to his feet, his knee protesting. He walked to the back of the unit, the beam of his flashlight playing over the plywood. He gently pushed Bear aside. "What have you got, boy?" He inspected the panel where Bear had been scratching. It was just damp, cheap wood, but as he shined the light upward, he noticed what his mind had dismissed earlier, the water stains. They didn't spread and bloom outward like normal water damage from a leak. No, they were perfectly straight. Two long, vertical lines of discoloration running from the ceiling to the floor about 3 feet apart. Too straight, Jack thought. Asterisk man-made. Seams, asterisk. He ran his fingers along the stains. They weren't stains. They were seams. He realized he wasn't looking at one solid sheet of plywood. It was a section deliberately fitted between two other panels. And Bear wasn't just scratching at rats. The dog had smelled something different. A draft of air coming from the gap. Jack pressed his hand against the panel. It was loose. It shifted slightly under his weight. This wasn't a structural wall. Jack's heart gave a single, hard jolt. He looked around the junk-filled unit, and his eyes landed on a rusted tire iron half buried under a pile of mildew rags. He grabbed it, returned to the wall, and wedged the flat end into the seam that Bear had exposed. The tire iron felt cold and heavy in his gloved hand. He jammed the flat end into the thin seam, putting his shoulder into it. The plywood was damp and soft, giving way easily. He heard a dull tearing sound as the wood fibers ripped, followed by the faint protest of old nails pulling free. The sound echoed in the silent unit, unnaturally loud. Jack froze, listening for any response from outside. Nothing. He pried the panel back. The bottom edge scraped against the concrete, and it fell forward with a soft thud into the dust of the storage unit. Bear, vindicated, pushed his nose into the opening, sniffing the rush of cold, stale air that escaped from the darkness. Jack dropped the tire iron and aimed his flashlight into the hole. It was exactly as the straight seams had suggested, a false wall. Behind it lay a narrow, dark void, a man-made gap between the plywood and the true concrete block wall of the unit. The space was no more than 2 feet deep, an intentional, carefully constructed hiding place. And it was not empty. Jack's breath caught. The beam of his light, cutting through the thick, swirling dust motes, landed on 3 objects sitting neatly on the concrete floor of the hidden space. They were not tossed in, they had been placed. His heart, which had been a cold stone of despair moments before, began a low, heavy drumbeat. He knelt, telling Bear to stay, and reached into the cramped void. The first item his fingers touched was a small wooden box. It was dark, perhaps walnut, and smooth to the touch, about the size of a thick paperback novel. It was surprisingly light. The second was a large manila folder, thick with papers. It was stiff, and the flap was sealed not with glue, but with a thick, ominous-looking circle of dark red wax, stamped with an insignia he couldn't make out in the dim light. The seal was unbroken. The third item was at the back. He had to stretch to reach it. It was a metal box. It was not a simple cash box. It looked like a military-grade ammunition case, painted a flat, non-reflective green. It was heavy, and when he slid it forward, he saw 2 high-quality combination tumbler locks securing the lid. Jack pulled the 3 items out of the void and set them on the grimy floor of the unit, staring at them. The trash bags, the moldy magazines, the $70 mistake, all of it faded. This was not junk. This was a secret. Bear whined softly, pressing his head against Jack's arm, sensing the sudden, sharp shift in his tension. "It's okay, boy," Jack murmured, his voice hoarse. "I don't know what this is, but you found it. You found it." His first instinct was to open him right there, but a cold prickle of awareness ran up his spine. The unit door was wide open. He was exposed. The facility owner had his name on a receipt. This was not the place. He looked at the metal box. The 2 locks were a clear message. "Keep out." He looked at the wooden box, but it was a wax-sealed folder that held his attention. It promised answers. "We're going back," Jack said, his voice firm. The walk back to the Chesapeake Steelworks was a blur of heightened awareness. Every passing car, every distant siren, made the muscles in Jack's neck tighten. The weight of the metal case under his arm was a constant, dangerous reminder. Bear, too, was on edge, walking in a tight protective heel, his ears erect and swiveling, sensing Jack's tension. When they finally slipped back through the broken fence and into the cavernous silence of the steel mill, Jack felt a small measure of relief. He navigated the debris-strewn floor back to the small brick security office, their cold, dry sanctuary. He pushed the door closed, wedging the broken chair under the knob as a feeble but symbolic lock. He sat on the floor, Bear settling immediately at his back, a warm, living guard. Jack clicked on his flashlight and propped it against the rusted desk, aiming the beam at the floor. He unwrapped the metal box and set it aside. The locks were a problem for later. He picked up the small wooden box, running his thumb over the smooth lid. It felt like a box for photographs or letters. Finally, he took the thick manila folder. He held it for a long moment, the red wax seal brittle with age. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs, and broke the seal with his thumb. It made a dry, brittle snapping sound that echoed in the tiny, silent room. He pulled out a stack of folded papers. The paper was thin, like onion skin. The ink had bled through in places where Arthur's hand had shaken. The top page was a letter, handwritten in a spidery, faded blue ink. The handwriting was shaky, the loops and crosses of a person writing under great duress. Jack angled the flashlight and began to read. Asterisk, my name is Arthur Finch. If you are reading this, I am dead. Asterisk. Jack's blood ran cold. Asterisk, I have lived in fear for 28 years. I am a coward, and I pray God has mercy on my soul. But I cannot go to my grave without leaving this. I cannot let the truth die with me. What I have hidden here is the truth about my brother, Jonathan Finch. John, he was a good man, the best of us. He was murdered. Asterisk. Jack stopped reading. Murdered. A sharp intake of breath. His knuckles went white around the paper. Bear pressed harder against his arm, sensing the shock. Mikey's face overlapped with Jonathan's in his mind. Two good men. Two lies. He returned to the letter, his eyes scanning the page faster. Asterisk, it was 1995. John was an activist, a man who believed in doing the right thing. He found out about a cover-up, a terrible one. It involved men with more power than I have ever known, men who could make people disappear. John was going to go to the press. He had proof. He told me. I begged him not to. I told him to think of his family, of his little girl, Emily, but he was brave, braver than I ever was. Asterisk. Asterisk, they staged an accident at his office. A gas leak, an explosion. The investigation was closed in a week. Tragic, the paper said. It was not a tragedy. It was an execution. I knew it, and they knew I knew it. I was terrified. I took his proof, everything he had collected, and I hid it. I ran. I hid his legacy in this hole, and I let them silence me. I let them destroy his name. I was so afraid they would come for me, for his daughter. Asterisk. Asterisk, the metal box contains the proof. The real ledgers, the reports, the photographs. The wooden box holds what is left of his life. Pictures of his daughter, Emily. I am so sorry, John. I was too weak. Asterisk. Asterisk, I don't know who you are, but I am paying for the storage unit with the last of my money. When I die, the payments will stop and it will be found. Maybe you are a stranger just looking for treasure. Maybe you are God's answer to my prayer. If you have any courage, any decency, please do what I could not. Do not let John's light go out. Get this to his daughter. Get this to the world. Asterisk. Arthur Art Finch. Jack read the letter twice, then a third time, the words blurring. He wasn't in the security office anymore. He was back in that sterile room, the smell of floor cleaner in his nostrils, listening to Captain Vance's cold, flat voice. Asterisk, operator error. The contract is vital. Asterisk, it was a cover-up. He looked at the green metal box. No longer just a heavy object, but a coffin of truth. He thought of Mikey, dead and slandered. He thought of Jonathan Finch, murdered and forgotten. And he thought of Arthur, a man so broken by fear that he had entombed his brother's legacy in the dark. This wasn't a gamble. It wasn't a mistake. It was a test. He put his head in his hands, the weight of the discovery settling over him. He had spent his last $70 not on junk, but on a ghost that was asking him to do the one thing he had failed to do for Mikey, to fight back. He looked at the small wooden box. He lifted the lid. Inside, resting on faded velvet, were a few items: a child's drawing of two stick figures labeled Daddy and Me, a small silver locket, and a stack of photographs. He pulled them out. A young man with a kind, bright smile and unruly-haired Jonathan Finch. And in his arms, a little girl with bright eyes and pigtails, perhaps 6 or 7 years old, laughing. Emily Finch. She would be a woman now in her 30s. A woman who grew up believing her father died in an accident. A woman who had her legacy the proof of her father's bravery stolen from her. Jack Sawyer looked at the smiling face in the photograph. He had his new mission. He was no longer just a man trying to survive the winter. He was a sergeant again, and he had his orders. The single beam of the flashlight turned the small security office into a cell of harsh light and deep shadow. The cold was absolute, a presence that deadened sound and slowed thought. Jack sat on the concrete, the shaky handwritten pages of Arthur Finch's confession resting on his knee. Bear, sensing a profound shift in his human's demeanor, the replacement of despair with new, vibrating tension, pressed his heavy body firmly against Jack's back, a silent, warm anchor. Jack read the letter again, and then a third time. He was no longer reading it as a stranger. He was reading it as a witness. The first page had been the confession. The pages beneath it, which he had barely registered, contained the context. Arthur, in his frantic, terrified script, had laid out the whole story. Jonathan John Finch was not just his brother. He was his opposite. Where Arthur was cautious, John was brave. Where Arthur saw a risk, John saw opportunity, not for money, but for change. John was an environmental activist, a local idealist who believed Baltimore's industrial scars could be healed. In 1995, John Finch had pulled all his money together to buy this very place, the abandoned Chesapeake Steelworks. He bought it because it was toxic, because it was a blight. His plan was to remediate the land, to clean the poison from the soil, and build something for the community, a park, affordable housing, a new beginning. But he wasn't the only one who wanted the land. The letter named a man, Silas Croft. Even Jack, disconnected as he was from the city's affairs, had seen that name. It was etched onto the sides of sleek new buildings downtown, on plaques at university centers, on the glossy billboards promising luxury condos. Croft was a developer, a man who didn't just build on the skyline. He owned it. According to Arthur's letter, Croft had wanted the Chesapeake land desperately. He didn't want to clean it. He wanted to bury the problem. Croft's plan was to build a massive logistics center, capitalizing on the port access. To do that, he needed the city to rezone the land from toxic industrial to commercial use. John Finch found the proof. Proof of falsified environmental reports, proof of bribes paid to city officials, proof that Croft was planning to build on poisoned ground, a decision that would risk the health of the entire district. John, the idealist, was going to expose him. The letter, dated 1996, described the night of the gas leak at John's small office, the investigation that lasted less than a week, the official ruling of accidental death. Jack's hand tightened on the paper. Croft's men came to me after the funeral, Arthur wrote. Asterisk, they knew John had kept records. They knew he trusted me. They didn't threaten me with violence. They were polite. They spoke of the future of the city. They spoke of how tragic it would be if John's young daughter, Emily, were to grow up without an uncle, too. Asterisk, the threat was clear. Terrified, Arthur had sworn he knew nothing. Croft wanted the land. The letter continued. As John's sole heir, it was mine. He sent his lawyers. They forced me to sell. I signed their papers. I took their money. But I did one thing. One small, cowardly thing. I kept the original deed, the master title, notarized and filed from when John first bought it. I told them it was lost in the fire. I gave them copies, signed transfers, everything they asked for, but not the original. I don't know if it matters legally, but I kept it. It's in the metal box. The box is everything. The fake permits, the ledger showing the bribes, and the original deed to this very steel mill. Jack finally understood. Croft had acquired the land through coercion, but the legal title was clouded. He couldn't fully secure his ownership, which must be why. 3 decades later, the Chesapeake Steelworks still stood, untouched and rotting. It was a monument to a crime, frozen in legal limbo. Croft's lawyers have been trying to quiet title this property for 28 years. That costs money. That leaves paper trails. He carefully folded the pages and placed them back in the folder. He sat in the dark, the flashlight beam aimed at the heavy green metal box. 2 locks, he thought. He looked at his hands. They were trembling slightly from the cold or the adrenaline. He stared at them, then slowly clenched them into tight, solid fists. The trembling stopped. He thought of the box, heavy with truth, and his mind was ripped away from the cold office. He was back in the dust, the smell of diesel and the dry, oppressive heat. He saw Mikey laughing as he fixed the winch. He saw the cheap, substandard hydraulics giving way. He saw Captain Richard Vance. He heard the voice, cold and final, in the sterile office. Asterisk, the contract is vital. Asterisk, a man's life, Mikey's life, his honor, wiped away to protect the contract, to protect the superior's career. Jack looked at the green box. So Croft had him killed for land he never really owned, he whispered to Bear. The proof is in this box. John Finch was Mikey. Silas Croft was Captain Vance. It was the same story. A cold, visceral rage, an emotion Jack hadn't felt in years, rose in his chest. It was not the explosive anger of his PTSD, but a focused, righteous fury. He had failed Mikey. He had been a sergeant, responsible for his men, and he had let Richard Vance silence him. He had let the lie stand. That failure had broken him, had cost him his career, his faith, and his place in the world. He was a ghost, haunting the ruins of his own life. But Arthur Finch's cowardly act had just given him a second chance. This wasn't just John's fight. It was his. It was the same fight, the fight of the powerless against the corrupt, the fight for the truth, no matter how heavy, against the lie, no matter how convenient. He would not fail again. He looked at Bear, who had been watching him, head tilted, sensing the change in the air. The dog let out a small, quiet whine. "It's okay, boy," Jack said, his voice different now, stripped of its despair. "We're done hiding." He picked up the heavy metal case. "We have a new mission." He would get this box open. But first, he had to find the heir. He had to find Emily Finch. The heavy, double-locked metal box was a tangible weight on Jack's soul. It was the objective, the proof, the entire mission, and he could not, under any circumstances, carry it with him. After a long, restless night in the cold security office, watching the flashlight beam grow weak as it rested on the box, Jack made his decision. He was a soldier without a base, a man with a vital piece of intelligence that needed to be secured. He took the metal box, still wrapped in his sleeping bag, and ventured deep into the cavernous main building of the Chesapeake Steel Works. He moved with practiced stealth, Bear padding silently beside him. He found what he was looking for in a collapsed maintenance tunnel, a heavy, rusted iron floor plate, using the tire iron from the storage unit. He pried it open, revealing a dark, dry crawl space beneath. He placed the box inside, covered it with his sleeping bag, and then replaced the heavy plate, scattering dust and debris over it until it looked untouched. The small wooden box of photos and Arthur Finch's letter, however, he placed in the very bottom of his backpack. Those he would not be parted from. His mission required information, and information required technology. There was only one place in the city that offered to a man like him, no questions asked, the Enoch Pratt Free Library in the city center. The journey there was tense. He and Bear rode the bus, the dog's head resting dutifully on Jack's knee, his presence earning a few nervous glances but no comments. The library, a grand building of stone and knowledge, loomed before them, and with it, the first hurdle. A large sign on the heavy doors read, * no animals permitted. Service animals only, *. Bear, for all his intelligence and loyalty, was not a registered service animal. Jack's throat tightened. He had not been separated from Bear for more than a few minutes in over 2 years. The dog was his anchor. He led Bear to a thick stone planter near the entrance, partially sheltered from the wind. He knelt, looking the dog directly in the eyes. "I have to go in, boy," he whispered, his voice thick. "I need you to wait. You have to wait. I will be back. I promise." Bear let out a low, anxious whine. He refused to sit, instead pressing his entire body weight against Jack's legs, sensing the tension and the impending separation. Jack felt the dog's anxiety, as if it were his own. He looped Bear's leash securely around Planter, his hands shaking slightly. "Guard. Wait." He stood and walked backward toward the doors, his heart pounding a sick rhythm. Bear sat rigid, his eyes locked on Jack until the heavy doors hissed shut between them. The transition was jarring. Jack stepped from the biting cold into a world of profound warmth, silence, and a soft, dry scent of old paper. He felt intensely visible, his worn jacket, his rough beard, the dirt under his fingernails. He kept his head down, ignoring the librarian's polite but curious glance, and found the public computer terminals in a quiet alcove. He sat down, flexed his cold fingers, and began the hunt. First, he searched for the victim, Jonathan Finch, Baltimore, 1996. The library's digital archives were fast. He found the old newspaper clippings from the Baltimore Sun. * tragic gas leak claims local activist. Investigation rules accidental. Community mourns John Finch. * the articles were brief, clinical, and final. They painted John as a well-meaning but perhaps careless man. The official narrative was exactly as Arthur's letter had described. A clean, closed case. Next, he searched for the killer, Silas Croft. The screen flooded with results. It was a digital monument to a titan. Asterisk, the Croft Group pledges $10 million to University Hospital. Silas Croft honored as Philanthropist of the Year. New Croft Tower to reshape Baltimore skyline. Asterisk, Jack felt a familiar cold sickness rising in his stomach. This was Captain Vance on a grand scale. Croft wasn't just a man. He was an institution, shielded by a firewall of charity and civic goodwill. The man who had murdered John Finch was now celebrated as the city's savior. He refocused. He was not here for the killer. He was here for the heir. He typed, Emily Finch, Baltimore. He scrolled. The third result was a recent article, dated just 2 weeks prior, from a local urban development blog. The headline read, Activist Emily Finch challenges Croft Group's new harbor project. Jack clicked the link, his heart hammering. The article showed a picture of a woman in her mid-30s with the same intelligent, determined eyes as the little girl in the photograph. She was standing at a podium, pointing at a map. The article detailed how Emily Finch, head of a community advocacy group, was formally protesting Silas Croft's latest development, claiming the corporation's environmental impact studies were flawed. He stared at the screen. She was still here, and she was already fighting him. John Finch's daughter had grown up to continue her father's war, never even knowing it was a war. She was facing the same enemy, armed only with facts, while Silas Croft held the bloody, hidden truth of what happened to her father. He had to reach her. He found the website for her organization. It had a contact us page, a simple email form. Jack knew he couldn't use it. An email was traceable, insecure. It would be a digital flare warning Croft that someone was digging. He needed to do this the old way, the soldier's way. He noted the organization's office address. Then he logged off, walked to the library's small gift shop, and used the last of his change to buy a single, plain greeting card and a stamped envelope. Back at a reading table, he took a deep breath and began to write, his handwriting rough and slanted. Miss Finch, asterisk, you do not know me. I have found something that belonged to your father, Jonathan Finch, from 1996. It is a private matter of the highest importance. I believe it contains information he was trying to protect before he died. I cannot send it electronically. I cannot bring it to your office. It is not safe. If you wish to see this, you must meet me. Asterisk. He paused. He needed to prove this wasn't a hoax. He opened his backpack and carefully took out the small wooden box. He removed one photograph, the clearest one of John holding his 6-year-old Emily on his shoulders, both laughing. He also took a page from Arthur's letter, not the part about the murder, but a paragraph about John's belief in the Chesapeake Project. He went to the library's copy machine and made a single, grainy copy of that page. He folded the photocopy and the original photograph into the card. Asterisk, I will be at Patterson Park, by the pagoda, this Saturday at 2 p.m. I will be wearing a black canvas jacket, and I will have a German shepherd with me. Please come alone. Asterisk. He signed it simply, a friend. He sealed the envelope and addressed it to Emily Finch, care of her organization's office. He walked out of the library's main doors, his eyes scanning for Bear. The dog was exactly where he had left him, a statue of black and tan fur, shivering violently from the cold but unmoving, his eyes fixed on the door. The moment he saw Jack, Bear sprang to his feet, his entire body racked with relief. Jack knelt and buried his face in the dog's cold ruff. Good boy, good boy. I'm here. He walked to a blue U.S. mailbox on the corner, held the letter for a moment, then slid it into the slot. The sound was soft, almost inaudible, but to Jack, it felt as final as a declaration of war. The first move had been made. Now, all they could do was wait. The 3 days between mailing the letter and the appointed Saturday meeting were a special kind of hell for Jack. He and Bear hunkered down in the cold security office, existing in a state of suspended animation. Jack hoarded the last of their food, venturing out only once under cover of darkness to retrieve the heavy locked metal box from its hiding place. He brought it back to the office where it sat in the corner, a dark, silent promise of either redemption or destruction. His mind replayed the mission briefs of his past. He was meeting an unknown contact in an exposed position with high-value intelligence. The scenario was agonizingly familiar. The old instincts, the hypervigilance of his PTSD, returned with a vengeance. He didn't sleep. He sat with his back to the wall, listening to the wind howl through the skeletons of the steel mill, one hand resting on Bear's warm, breathing flank. Saturday arrived, gray and unforgiving. At noon, Jack ate his last protein bar. He fed Bear the remaining handful of kibble. "No matter what happens today, boy," Jack said softly, scratching the dog's ears. "Tonight, one way or another, I'll get you a real meal. I promise." Bear looked up at him, his amber eyes reflecting a deep, unwavering trust. They left the steelworks an hour early, taking a broken, roundabout path to Patterson Park. He needed to observe the objective. The park was windswept and nearly empty. The pagoda, the designated meeting point, stood silent, its ornate roof dusted with frost. Jack didn't go near it. He found a position on a slight rise, partially obscured by a stand of bare-branched oak trees about 50 yards away. It gave him a clear view of the pagoda, the nearby paths, and the parking area. At 1:58 p.m., his heart began to pound a heavy military cadence. A practical blue sedan pulled into the lot. A woman got out. It was her, Emily Finch. She was taller than he'd expected, and she moved with a quick, impatient energy. She was in her mid-30s, wearing a sensible dark green peacoat jeans and sturdy boots. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked exactly like the activist on the website, sharp, focused, and not a little intimidating. But as she drew closer, Jack saw her father's eyes, the same intelligent, determined eyes in the photograph, though hers held a weariness John's had not. She stood by the pagoda, her arms crossed, scanning the empty park. She was visibly tense, almost angry, as if expecting a trap or a waste of her time. "Okay, boy," Jack whispered. "Let's go." He stepped out from the trees. Bear moved at his left heel, a silent, dark shadow. Emily saw them immediately. Her hand flew to her pocket, perhaps gripping her phone or keys. She took a half-step back, her suspicion rolling off her in palpable waves. Jack stopped about 10 feet away, holding up one hand, palm out. "Miss Finch, you're the one who sent the letter," she stated. It wasn't a question. Her eyes darted from Jack's weathered, bearded face to the powerful dog at his side, then back again. She was calculating. "I am. My name is Jack Sawyer. Thank you for coming." "You said you had something of my father's," she said, her voice sharp and clipped. "This isn't a good time for games. What is this?" Jack saw her bracing for a scam, a plea for money from a desperate man. He knew he had only one chance to break through her defenses. He kept his movements slow, unzipping his backpack and reaching inside. He pulled out the small, smooth wooden box. He didn't hand it to her. He just held it. "This belonged to him," Jack said. Emily's eyes fixed on the box, her expression faltering. "And this," Jack continued, "was inside." He took out the original photograph, the one of a smiling John Finch holding a laughing, pigtailed little girl on his shoulders. He held it out to her. She stared at the photo. Her professional mask, the hard shell the activist, simply dissolved. Her breath caught in a small, sharp gasp. She stepped forward, her hand trembling as she took the small, faded square paper. "My God," she whispered, her fingers tracing the image of her younger self. I don't have this one. I thought they were all lost in the fire." Her gaze snapped up to his, the suspicion replaced by a raw, desperate confusion. "Where did you get this?" "It was with this," Jack said. He handed her the folded, grainy photocopy of Arthur Finch's letter. She unfolded the paper, her eyes scanning the shaky handwriting, her brow furrowed. Jack watched her read the paragraph about the Chesapeake Steelworks, about her father's dream of remediating the poisoned land. Her face went pale. The color drained from her cheeks, and she swayed, putting a hand on the cold wood of the pagoda to steady herself. She was connecting the words on the page to the fight she was currently waging. "Who are you?" she asked again, but this time it was a plea. "I found these," Jack said, his voice quiet. "They were hidden in an old storage unit. Your uncle, Arthur Finch. He wrote the letter. He hid everything. My Uncle Art? Emily's voice cracked. The name seemed to wound her. He told us everything was gone. He told us to leave Baltimore. He said it wasn't safe. He was afraid. Jack said. He said your father was murdered. Emily looked away, her gaze distant, staring at the frost on the ground. She was silent for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was different. The emotion was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity that chilled Jack more than the wind. I knew it, she said. I always knew it. My mother, until the day she died, she knew it wasn't an accident. She looked up, and for the first time, Jack felt she was truly seeing him. Mr. Sawyer, you have stepped into something you do not understand. I think I do, Jack said. My friend Mikey died the same way. A lie to protect a contract. It was a cover-up. It's still a cover-up, Emily corrected him, her voice intense. I'm an activist. I run a community group. For the last 6 months, I have been the primary opposition to Silas Croft's new harbor development. The Croft Group, Jack said, remembering the search results. Yes, and they don't fight fair. She began to pace, rubbing her arms. I've had strange clicks on my phone. My office was broken into twice, but nothing was taken. 2 of my biggest donors pulled their funding last month, citing unforeseen complications. They're watching me. I've known it. I've felt it. She suddenly stopped and looked around the empty park, her eyes wide with new, dawning horror. Bear's ears swiveled. He didn't growl, but his body went still. He heard something Jack couldn't. Oh, God, she breathed. They're watching me, which means they saw me meet you. They saw a homeless man, a man they can't identify, pass me a package in an open park. They don't know what we discussed, but they know we met. Jack's soldier instincts took over. His gaze swept the perimeter. The park was no longer a meeting place. It was an exposed field. We need to move, he said. You don't understand, Emily said, her voice rising. You're in danger now. Both of you. Bear, sensing her distress, allowed a low, soft whine. Jack put a hand on his head. I have the rest of it, Jack said, cutting through her panic. The proof. It's in a metal box. It's locked. I have it hidden. It's safe. This stopped her. Proof? Real proof. Arthur's letter said so. Ledgers. Permits. The original deed to the Chesapeake Steelworks. Emily's eyes widened. The deed? That's why he could never build on it. It's legally not his. She took a deep, shuddering breath. We can't go to the police. The letter mentioned bribed officials. In this city, Croft is the police. They'd seize the box, and you and I would disappear. She pulled out her phone, then paused, staring at it. They're probably listening to this, too. She shoved it back in her pocket. We have to go. We need help. Who? Jack asked. There's one person, she said. One man. His name is Mac Riley. Emily drove with a focused, controlled anger. She handled the car not like a civilian, but like someone who had been expecting a crisis. Jack sat in the back, the heavy, warm presence of Bear pressed against his side, the dog's chin resting on the edge of the window, his gaze fixed forward like a silent co-pilot. Mac's office isn't secure enough for this, Emily said, her eyes meeting Jack's in the rearview mirror. Not if they're watching me. We need the proof first. Where is it? The Chesapeake Steelworks, Jack said. Our shelter. The security office. Emily's knuckles whitened on the steering wheel. My father's mill, she whispered, the words heavy with a reverence that bordered on pain. She turned the car toward the river, toward the skeletal remains of her father's dream. She didn't park near the main road. She used an overgrown access lane, pulling the car behind a collapsed brick wall, concealing it from the street. Stay here. Keep the engine running. I'll be fast, Jack said. No, Emily said, her voice firm. I'm coming. I need to see it. It's not safe, and not just a building. They're watching me, Mr. Sawyer. The safest place for me is right next to you, and I am not letting that box out of my sight. Jack looked at her, seeing the steel that must have defined her father. He gave a single, sharp nod. Bear. With me? Guard. He led the way, slipping through the same gap in the fence he and Bear used as a door. Emily followed without hesitation, her eyes wide as she took in the cavernous, dead foundry, the silence broken only by the crunch of their boots on frozen debris. They reached the small brick security office. Jack pushed the door open, the sound of grinding metal echoing slightly. "It's in here," Jack said, stepping inside. And then he froze. Bear, who had been moving just ahead, stopped dead in the doorway. The dog didn't growl. He didn't bark. He emitted a low, almost inaudible rumble from deep in his chest, his body tensed, the fur along his spine bristling. Jack felt the air change. They were not alone. Well, a voice said, slick and confident. Two men stepped out from the shadows beside the building, blocking their exit. They weren't dressed for the cold, wearing expensive-looking wool coats over dark suits. The one who spoke was in his 40s, with a smug, clean-shaven face. This was Nick Sullivan. He smiled, but it was a cold, thin expression. The other man, Eric Dalton, was built like a refrigerator younger, silent, his gaze flat and watchful. He was a muscle. Jack's eyes flicked between them, assessing. Asterisk Sullivan was left-handed, weight on his back foot. Dalton's coat bulged on the right. Both were carrying asterisk. "That's far enough," Sullivan said, his voice casual. He looked at Jack's worn jacket and rough beard with open disdain. "This is private property. You're trespassing." "We were just leaving," Emily said, stepping forward, her voice sharp. Sullivan's smile widened. "Ah, Miss Finch. Of course you are. We were wondering where you'd run off to. We saw you at the park. Made a new friend, I see." His eyes flicked back to Jack. "You're getting into things that don't concern you. Old man. This mill, this city, it's not your business. And Miss Finch is involved in things that are way over her head." Bear took one step forward, placing himself between Jack and the men, the low rumble in his chest intensifying. Dalton shifted his weight, his hand moving slightly inside his coat. "That's a nice dog," Sullivan said, his eyes narrowing. "It would be a shame if something happened to him." He took a step closer. "So here's the message from people who matter. You're done. Forget you were here. Forget you ever met her. Crawl back under whatever bridge you came from. We won't ask again." Jack didn't move. He didn't speak. He simply met Sullivan's gaze, his mind cold, his training flooding back. He assessed their stances, their hands, the exits. He recognized these men. They weren't just security. They were enforcers. This was the cover-up, active and breathing, right in front of him. "We're leaving," Jack said, his voice a low growl that almost matched his dog's. "Yeah," Sullivan sneered. "You are." He gestured, and the two men stepped aside, leaving the path clear. They didn't know about the box. This was just an intimidation tactic, a warning shot. Jack grabbed the heavy metal box from the corner. He grabbed Emily's arm. "Go. Now." He backed out of the office, Bear walking backward with him, his eyes never leaving the two men. They walked fast, not running, back through the dead factory. They didn't look back until they were through the fence and back in the car. Jack threw the box in the trunk, slammed it shut, and jumped into the back with Bear. "Go." Emily didn't need to be told. The car spit gravel as it spun onto the access road. "They were here," she said, her voice shaking not with fear but with rage. "They were waiting for us. They knew you'd come back. They're watching you, just like you said," Jack said grimly. "But they don't know what we have. Not yet. Max. Now." Mac Riley's office was in a nondescript warehouse in an industrial district. The sign on the door read Riley and Associates, Risk Management. Emily used a key to let them in through a side door. The inside was sparse, professional, and smelled of coffee and ozone. A man was waiting for them. Mac Riley was in his early 60s, an African-American man with a neatly trimmed gray beard and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. He wore a simple button-down shirt and a visible holster. "Emily," he said, his voice a calm baritone. He nodded to Jack, his eyes assessing him, then dropped to assess Bear. "Mac, this is Jack Sawyer. Emily said, her words tumbling out. Jack, this is Mac Riley. He found it, Mac. He found my father's proof. She gestured to the box Jack was carrying. They're on to us. Two of Croft's men confronted us at the mill. Mac's calm expression didn't change, but his eyes hardened. Croft's men? You're sure? Nick Sullivan and Eric Dalton, Jack said. A flicker of recognition crossed Mac's face. Croft's personal errand boys. Ex-cops, both dishonorably discharged. They've been on his payroll for years. He looked at the box. So it's true. He gestured to a sturdy work table. Set it on there. While Jack and Emily explained, Mac examined the green metal box. He ran his fingers over the two combination locks. This is military grade. Late 80s, early 90s. High-security tumbler locks. This is an amateur hour. John was serious about this. Can you open it? Emily asked, her hands clasped tightly. Mac permitted himself a small, thin smile. The Bureau teaches you how to break things. It also teaches you how to unbreak them. He went to a workbench and returned with a set of delicate tools and a stethoscope. For 20 minutes, the only sounds were the faint metallic whispers of Mac's tools and the soft, rhythmic clicks of the combination dials. He worked with the patience of a surgeon, his head pressed against the stethoscope. A tiny bead of sweat traced a path down his temple, the only sign of the immense pressure. One, he murmured, as the first tumbler fell into place. More turning, more listening. A quiet snick as the second pin dropped. He worked on the final lock for 10 solid minutes, the tension in the room growing thick. Finally, Mac nodded. That's two. He released the latches. A heavy thud echoed as the internal locking bar released. He looked at Emily. It's your history, kid. You open it. Emily stepped forward, her hands visibly shaking. She lifted the heavy lid. The contents of the box were perfectly preserved. The air that escaped was dry and smelled of old paper, leather, and the faint, metallic scent of a typewriter ribbon. Mac began to lift the items out one by one, placing them on the table, handling them like the artifacts they were. Item 1, he said, pulling out a thick, leather-bound journal. Emily opened it. Her father's neat, technical handwriting filled the pages. She let out a small, broken sound, her fingers tracing the words. She flipped to a random page and read aloud, her voice trembling. March 15th, 1995. Emily lost her first tooth today. She smiled, and there was this tiny gap. She said the tooth fairy would bring her a new shovel for the garden. Her laugh was half-sob. He remembered that. Item 2, Mac continued, pulling out a thick folder. Chesapeake zoning permits 1995. He fanned them out. They all bore the official city seal. These had to be the fakes he was talking about, the ones Croft's people submitted. Item 3. He pulled out 2 hardback accounting ledgers. Emily, this is it. The bribe money. It's all here. Payments, dates, shell companies. And this, Jack said, pointing to the bottom of the box. Mac reached in and pulled out the final item. It was a small black microcassette tape recorder. My God, Emily whispered. He recorded him. As Mac was examining the ledger, his back to the door, Bear suddenly lifted his head. The dog didn't growl. He let out a single high-pitched whine, a sound Jack hadn't heard since combat, a high alert signal. Then he stood up, the fur on his neck raising. A low, threatening rumble started in his chest. Jack, Mac said, not looking up. The dog. Bear. What is it? Jack was at the dog's side in an instant. Mac was already moving. He crossed the room in 2 strides, went to a small, dirty window overlooking the street, and peered to the edge of the blinds. He was still for a long second, then let the blind fall. Damn it, he whispered. Emily, you were right. You were followed. Or I was. He looked at Jack, his face grim. Black sedan parked across the street. Lights off. 2 occupants. Nick Sullivan and Eric Dalton. They know we're here. They know we're all together, and they know we have the box. He turned, his demeanor shifting instantly from analyst to field agent. We have to split up. We have to move now. The world narrowed. They're watching the front, Mac said, his voice a low, urgent command. They think we're all in here. They're waiting for us to panic. What's the plan? Jack asked, his voice steady. We split, Max said, shoving the ledgers and the journal back into the box and slamming the lid. The sound of the latches clicking shut was sharp and final. I'm the decoy. I'll take the box. I'll take my truck. They know it. They'll follow me. It's the only prize they care about. And us? Emily asked, her voice trembling. There's a service door at the end of the back alley. It opens onto a different street. You, Jack, and the dog go out that way. Quietly. Now. Where do we go? Jack asked, pulling his backpack on. Anywhere but home, Max said, his eyes hard. Don't go to your apartment, Emily. Don't use your phone. Don't use a credit card. They'll be tracking both. Go dark. Where will we meet? Jack asked. We won't. Not yet. I'm taking this box straight to my lawyer. She's the only one in this city Croft can't touch. She'll secure it. I'll contact her when I'm clear, and she'll find a way to contact you. Go. Go. Mac moved toward the front door, the heavy box in one hand, his keys in the other. Jack grabbed Emily's arm. This way. He pulled her toward the back of the warehouse, Kaiser padding silently at his heels. They heard the sound of Mac's truck engine roaring, to life a defiant growl in the night. Almost immediately, it was followed by the sound of another engine to black sedan accelerating to follow. The decoy was working. They're following him. Emily breathed, a note of relief in her voice. Not both of them, Jack said, stopping. Listen. Emily froze. Then she heard it. Not a car. The heavy, rhythmic sound of footsteps. Someone was running. A large man running hard, coming up the main alley from the direction of the street. He must have dropped him off, Jack whispered, his voice grim. Dalton. He's on foot. He's cutting us off. He looked left, then right. The alley was a brick canyon. This way, he hissed, pulling Emily into a dark, narrow gap between two buildings, a space filled with dumpsters. They pressed themselves into the shadows. Bear stood in front of them, motionless as a statue, not making a sound. The running footsteps grew louder, a heavy, pounding cadence on the pavement. Eric Dalton ran straight past the mouth of their hiding place, his large silhouette disappearing toward the street Mac had driven down. He was chasing the truck. We're clear, Emily whispered, starting to move. No, Jack said, holding her back. Wait. He counted to 10, and then, as he had expected, the footsteps returned, slower this time. Dalton had realized his mistake. He was coming back, checking the alleys. They were trapped. Dalton was at the T-junction 50 yards away, scanning the darkness. Jack knelt beside Bear. He put his hand on the dog's ruff, his voice a Bear whisper. Bear, see him. Go get him. Go, boy, go. He pointed not at the man, but down the other fork of the alley, the one that led away from them. Bear understood immediately. He was not to attack. He was to divert. The big dog burst from the shadows, a dark streak in the darkness. He ran 20 yards down the opposite alley, stopped, and unleashed a sudden, booming series of barks, a sound that exploded against the brick walls, echoing like cannon shots. There! The dog! Dalton's voice was a rough shout. They heard his footsteps change direction, sprinting away from them, chasing the sound of the barks. Now, Jack said, grabbing Emily's hand. Go. Go left. Don't run. Walk fast. Don't look back. They moved, emerging from the gap and heading in the opposite direction, melting into the shadows of the city. They didn't stop for nearly a mile, crossing empty lots, skirting the edges of darkened parks, staying deep in the industrial shadows. The adrenaline that kept them warm began to fade, and the brutal reality of the Baltimore winter night set in. Emily, the strong-willed, articulate activist who had faced down corporations, was now just a woman in a pea coat, freezing and on the run. She stumbled on a broken piece of pavement, and Jack caught her arm. She was shaking violently, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I can't, she stammered, her teeth chattering. Jack, I'm so cold. My car, my apartment. I have nowhere to go. She looked at him, her eyes wide and desperate in the dim light of a distant street lamp. The power dynamic had completely inverted. She was no longer the one with the contacts in the car. She was a refugee. Jack's voice was calm, steady. I know. We're exposed here. We need hard cover. We need to get inside. Where? She pleaded. Where is safe? Jack looked toward the river, toward the black, skeletal silhouette of the Chesapeake Steelworks. The one place they'll never look, he said. The place they think we just ran from. We're going back to the mill. Emily looked horrified. Back there? With them? They're gone, Jack said. They followed Mac. They think we're scattered. It's the last place they'd check. It's my ground. I know the layout. It's safe. She stared at him, her activist fire extinguished, replaced by a cold, raw fear. She gave a small, defeated nod. Okay. As if summoned, Bear appeared from the darkness, padding silently up to them. He nudged Jack's hand, then, sensing Emily's distress, gently pushed his cold nose into her glove. The walk back to the mill was a long, cold misery, but this time Jack was in the lead. He moved with purpose, his limp a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the howling wind. When they slipped back through the broken fence, the massive, dead factory felt different to Emily. It was a terrifying graveyard, but to Jack, it was a fortress. He led her through the echoing darkness, his movements sure and quiet. He didn't need a flashlight. He navigated the debris fields and rusted machinery from memory. Emily stumbled behind him, wincing at every sound. They reached the small, dark security office. It was a pocket of absolute cold. Emily huddled against the wall, wrapping her arms around herself, her body shaking uncontrollably. It's colder in here than it was outside, she whispered. Sit, Jack said. His voice was no longer that of a homeless man. It was the quiet, confident command of a sergeant. Against that wall. It's the most insulated. He gestured to the dog. Bear, watch her. Bear, understanding the change in his human's tone, immediately lay down, pressing his large, thick-furred body against Emily's legs. She let out a small, sharp breath as the dog's body heat began to seep into her. Jack began to work. He moved with an economy of motion that mesmerized her, the way a soldier banks a fire. He retrieved a rusted metal barrel from the corner and dragged it to the center of the room. He left the office and returned moments later with an armload of dry, splintered wood from a broken pallet he had scouted weeks ago, and a handful of balled-up, dry shipping manifests from the desk. He built a small, structured fire inside the barrel, a safe, contained column of fuel. He struck a single waterproof match from his pack and lit the paper. A small orange flame caught, sputtered, and then grew, casting flickering, dancing shadows on the walls. It was a tiny pinprick of life in a vast, dead building. Emily watched him, her chattering teeth beginning to slow. He wasn't a man surviving. He was a man operating. He unzipped his backpack. He took out his small, soot-blackened cookpot and a bottle of water. He also pulled out a small, foil-wrapped packet. It's not much, he said, his voice quiet. It's a high-energy ration bar. Military issue. You need to eat. He broke the dense bar in half and handed it to her. What about you? She asked, her voice small. What about Bear? We're fine, he said. Eat. She ate. It was dry and tasted like sawdust and peanuts, but it was the best thing she had ever eaten. The warmth from the fire in the barrel, the heat from the dog at her side, and the energy from the food began to chase the deep, penetrating chill from her bones. She looked at Jack. He was sitting on the floor across from her, staring into the fire, his profile harsh and focused in the orange light. He was alert, his gaze sweeping the doorway every few seconds. But he was not anxious. He was in complete control of this hostile, broken place. In that moment, Emily Finch no longer saw a homeless man. She no longer saw a victim or a project. She saw a soldier. She saw a man of immense capability and quiet, profound dignity, a man who with nothing had just given her heat, food, and safety, a man who had more honor in his weathered, callous hands than Silas Croft had in his entire polished empire. A deep, unshakable respect settled over her. You knew exactly what to do, she said, her voice soft. Jack didn't look up from the fire. This part, I remember, in the service. You learn to make a home out of whatever you've got. You learn to watch, and you learn to wait. Thank you, Jack, she said. The words felt small and inadequate. For all of this. He gave a single, small nod. Bear let out a low, contented sigh and rested his heavy head on Emily's lap, trusting her. The three of them sat in the small, cold office, illuminated by the flickering fire, a tiny, defiant island of life in the heart of the shadow, waiting for the dawn. The fire in the barrel had burned down to cold gray ash. The weak light of dawn found Jack and Emily huddled in the security office, stiff, exhausted, and covered in grime. Bear, who had kept a steadfast watch between them all night, let out a low, soft whine, sensing the shift from darkness to day. Emily looked at Jack. The shared fear and the strange, Spartan safety of the night had forged a bond between them. The gratitude and respect she felt was a solid, tangible thing. "What now, Jack?" she asked, her voice ragged. "Now," Jack said, his own voice rough in the cold. "We take back the fight." They did not have to wait long. At precisely 7 a.m., a nondescript gray van pulled up to collapsed loading dock near their fence gap. The driver's door opened and Mac Riley stepped out. He gave a short, sharp whistle. Bear's ears shot up, and he looked at Jack. "He's clear," Jack said, relief washing over him. "Let's go." They slipped out of the mill. Mac, looking tired but energized, met them at the fence. "Sullivan and Dalton followed me halfway across the state," Mac said, his voice low. "I lost them in the early morning traffic. But they know. They're hunting." He looked at them, his eyes sharp. "Good. Let them." He opened the side door of the van. "Get in, both of you." Bear hopped in the back. Jack helped Emily, who was stiff from the cold, and climbed in after her. "Where are we going?" Emily asked. "The only fortress we have left," Mac said. "My lawyer's office." Mac drove them not to a towering glass skyscraper, but to a discreet historical brownstone in a quiet part of the city. The brass plaque on the door simply read, C.L. Park, Attorney at Law. The door was opened by a woman who was a physical opposite of the chaotic night they had just endured. This was Chloe Park. She was in her late 40s, of Asian descent, and wore an impeccably tailored gray suit. Her black hair was pulled back in a severe, elegant bun. Her expression was neutral, but her eyes were sharp, analytical, and missed nothing. "Mac!" She nodded, stepping aside. "Emily, Mr. Sawyer." Her gaze lingered on Jack for a moment, taking in his worn jacket and the deep exhaustion in his face, then flicked to Bear. "He's well behaved, I trust?" "He's a guard, not a pet," Jack said quietly. "Good." Chloe led them into a large conference room. The heavy, locked metal box sat in the center of a polished mahogany table, looking like an ancient relic in a modern tomb. A man was standing by the window, coffee cup in hand. He was younger than Jack expected, perhaps mid-30s, with rumpled shirt, restless energy, and the skeptical eyes of a man who had heard every lie. "This is Jake Miller," Chloe said by way of introduction. "He's the best investigative reporter in the city, and the only one I trust." Jake nodded at them. "This is a hell of a story. If it's true—" "It's true," Emily said, her voice finding its strength. "That's what we're here to prove," Chloe said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "Good morning. Mac, Mr. Miller, and I have been busy while you were unavailable." She gestured to the table. "The original box is here. It is also now on a secure server, with copies in 3 different states. The ledgers, the journal, everything. The microcassette is currently with a forensic audio specialist. We should have a restored file by tomorrow." She then folded her hands. "But I didn't wait. Using the names from John Finch's journal, I started making calls. It turns out your father wasn't the only accident connected cross projects in the late 1990s. Emily looked up, her face pale. 6 other men, all died in unforeseen accidents on Croft-related sites between 1996 and 1998. I have already been in contact with a representative for 3 of those families, a woman named Anna Parker. She is very motivated to join our civil suit." Emily looked stunned. This was no longer just about her father. It was a conspiracy. As if on cue, Chloe's desk phone emitted a soft, polite chime. Her assistant's voice came over the intercom. "Ms. Park, I have a Mr. Cross on the line. He says he's counsel for Croft Group." A heavy silence fell over the room. Jack looked at Mac. Mac just nodded, his face grim. They were faster than he thought. Chloe pressed the speakerphone button. "This is Chloe Park." A voice, smooth as oil glass, filled the room. "Good morning, Miss Park. My name is Charles Cross. I represent the interests of Mr. Silas Croft. It has come to our attention that you are in possession of some archival materials belonging to his organization. My client is a reasonable man. He understands that misunderstandings happen. He has requested a brief, informal meeting to discuss rectifying the situation." "I'm not sure we have anything to discuss, Mr. Cross," Chloe said, her voice like ice. "Oh, I think you do," the lawyer purred. "My client is prepared to make a very generous offer to Miss Finch for her father's personal effects. Shall we say 10 a.m.? Our office." "No," Chloe said instantly. "My office. 10 a.m. And your client must be present, not just as lawyers." There was a pause on the line. "That is unusual, but I will convey your request. See you at 10. The line clicked, followed by a dial tone. Jake Miller looked like he'd just been handed the story of the year. Emily was shaking. "He wants to buy us off. He wants to know what we have." Mac corrected her. "And who we are." Jack said nothing, but his hand unconsciously clenched into a fist. He was finally going to meet him. The man in the tower. The Silas Croft of Baltimore. At precisely 10 a.m., the conference room doors opened. 3 men entered. The man in the lead was Silas Croft. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s, but tall and impeccably dressed in a dark, custom-tailored suit. He moved with the slow, assured vigor of a man who owned the very ground he walked on. He had a full head of white hair and the calm, almost kind eyes of a lifelong philanthropist. He was the man whose name was on hospitals. Behind him was Charles Cross, the lawyer, carrying a sleek leather briefcase. And behind him was a younger man in his late 20s, his suit sharp and modern, his eyes nervous. This was Ben Croft, the grandson, the heir apparent. He looked less like a conspirator and more like a modern CO, who was deeply uncomfortable with this entire messy, analog situation. Jack stared at Silas Croft. He saw the kind eyes, the confident posture, the aura of untouchable authority, and all he could see was Captain Richard Vance. He saw the man who had signed a paper and turned his friend Mikey's death into a lie. His blood ran cold. Bear, who was lying under the table at Jack's feet, let out a single low growl, sensing the wave of cold fury coming off his human. "Ms. Park, Ms. Finch," Croft said, his voice a practiced, grandfatherly baritone. He nodded to Mac. "Mr. Riley, it has been a long time." He then looked at Jack. The kind eyes vanished. His gaze swept over Jack's worn jacket and weathered face with a flicker of analytical dismissal. This was the source of the problem. The variable. "Please sit," Chloe said, not offering coffee. Charles Cross began. "As I mentioned, my client, Mr. Croft, values this city's history. He was a contemporary of Mr. Finch's. He deeply regrets the tragedy and wishes to ease Miss Finch's burden. We are prepared to offer $5 million for your father's effects and a full confidentiality agreement." Emily, who had been silent, spoke. Her voice was clear and did not shake. "My father's memory isn't for sale." Silas Croft smiled a patronizing expression. "My dear, this is a 30-year-old misunderstanding. Papers get lost. Stories get confused. This is a chance for everyone to walk away whole." "No one walks away from this whole, Mr. Croft," Chloe interjected. She slid a copy of John Finch's journal across the table. "We have the ledgers. We have the permits. We know about the bribes." Cross scoffed. "Circumstantial. The words of a dead man. It will never hold up." "Then perhaps," Chloe said, "you're more worried about the living. I've been retained by Anna Parker." The name landed on the table like a grenade. Ben Croft flinched and pulled out his phone, his face paling. "Down 18% in pre-market," he muttered, almost to himself. The ESG fallout alone will crater our valuation. Ben, Silas Croft warned, but his grandson ignored him. And then there's the tape. Chloe finished. The audio of your meeting with John Finch 3 days before he died. The one where you discussed the cover-up. The original is with a DC forensics lab right now. We have a copy. The original is untouchable. The restored file will be ready in 2 hours. Coincidentally, that's about when your board meeting is scheduled, isn't it? The room was silent. Silas Croft was staring at Chloe, his face a mask of cold fury. He had been completely outmaneuvered. It was Ben, the grandson, who finally broke the silence. He was pale, his eyes darting between Chloe and his grandfather. He wasn't looking at the past. He was looking at the stock market. Grandfather, Ben said, his voice low and urgent, his MBA-trained mind doing the math. The press, the other families, a criminal investigation. This isn't a lawsuit. This is an extinction event. Our stock will be worthless by noon. Be quiet, Ben, Silas snapped. No, Ben insisted, standing up. I won't. This is my company, too. My future. That story breaks, and Croft is a toxic name. We're ruined. He looked at Chloe, not with morals, but with pure pragmatism. What do you want? Chloe smiled. My client wants the truth. A full public admission of your role in the safety violations and the cover-up that led to the deaths of Jonathan Finch and the other 6 men. The establishment of a $20 million compensation fund for the families and a $30 million endowment for a new city fund for workplace safety named after the victims. Impossible. Charles Cross blustered. It's that, Jake Miller said quietly from corner, or my story runs on the front page tomorrow. Your choice. Ben Croft looked at his grandfather. Control the damage, sir, he pleaded. It's the only move we have left. We have to control the narrative. Silas Croft sat back in his chair. He looked defeated, not by justice. Jack realized, not by morality. He was defeated by business. He had been cornered by a balance sheet. He stared at Jack, at Emily, at Mac. His eyes were no longer kind. They were filled with a pure, bottomless hatred for the people who had pulled this from the grave. Draft the agreement, Silas Croft said to his lawyer, his voice a dead monotone. We'll sign it. The silence that followed was heavier and more profound than any noise. It was the sound of a 30-year-old weight settling, of a ghost finally being heard. Silas Croft, a man who had been a titan of the city, looked for the first time like what he was, a frail, bitter old man. His grandson Ben was already on the phone with their PR team, his voice a low, urgent monotone, speaking in the bloodless language of damage control and managed narratives. Jack, Emily, and Mac watched as Chloe slid the finalized settlement across the polished mahogany table. Croft's hand, holding the expensive pen, was steady. He signed his name with a sharp, angry finality. It was not the signature of a man repenting. It was the signature of a king abdicating. The moment it was done, Croft and his team left without another word. Jake Miller looked at the remaining group. It runs tomorrow, he said, giving a respectful nod to Emily and Jack. Thank you. The next morning, the city woke to a different world. The front page of the Baltimore Sun was dominated by a bold, stark headline, the Chesapeake cover-up. Croft admits to 30-year conspiracy, 7 deaths linked to fraud. Jake Miller's story was a masterpiece of investigative journalism. It laid out everything. The murder of Jonathan Finch in 1996 disguised as an accident, the fake environmental reports, the bribed officials, the 6 other families represented by Anna Parker who had lost loved ones, and at the center of it, the quiet discovery of a hidden metal box by a local veteran, Jack Sawyer. Jack read the story on a newspaper he'd bought with a $5 bill Mac had pressed into his hand. He sat on a cold bench, the city roaring to life around him, with bared his feet. He saw Silas Croft's picture, the same philanthropic smile, now looking like a grotesque mask. He thought of Captain Vance. He thought of Mikey. He felt no joy, no triumph, just a quiet, heavy click of a lock finally falling into place. It was the end of a war. He hadn't known he was still fighting. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. As Ben Croft had predicted, the name was toxic. The Croft Group stock plummeted. The city council convened an emergency session to review every contract Croft had ever signed. The university and the hospital, their names now stained by association, announced they would be removing the Croft name from their wings and halls. The empire built on lies and buried bodies crumbled under the weight of the truth. Justice, it turned out, was not just a moral victory. It was a financial catastrophe. Weeks passed. The sharp cold of winter began to ease, replaced by the damp, muddy promise of spring. Jack and Bear remained at the Chesapeake Steelworks. It was still their shelter, but it felt different. They were no longer hiding, they were guarding. Mac and Emily visited regularly, bringing food, supplies, and for Bear, heavy bags of high-quality kibble. The hollow-eyed hunger that had defined them was gone. One brisk March afternoon, Emily arrived, but not just for a visit. She found Jack reinforcing the security office door, a task he was performing with meticulous, practiced skill. A young worker named Marcus watched him for a moment, then approached. "Sergeant, want me to reinforce that framing?" Jack nodded, showed him how to brace the doorframe with a piece of rebar, and Marcus nodded, impressed. "Jack," Emily said, her voice bright with energy he hadn't heard before. "Emily," he nodded, wiping his hands on a rag. Bear trotted over, greeting her with a respectful nudge of his nose. "The settlement is finalized," she said. "The funds for the families, including Anna Parker's, have been transferred. The compensation, it's done. It's real." "That's good," Jack said. "That's right." "And the land," she said, looking around the vast, rusting yard. "The Chesapeake Steelworks. My father's mill. It's officially, uncontestedly mine." She took a deep breath. "The developers are circling, of course. They see acres of prime riverfront property. They're offering a fortune to take it off my hands." "You're going to sell," Jack stated. It was a logical move. "No," Emily said, a fierce, bright smile on her face. "I'm not." She gestured around them. "I'm going to finish what my father started." Jack looked at her, confused. "I'm using the settlement money, the money Silas Croft paid in his own name, to redevelop this place," she explained, her arms wide. "I'm not building condos. I'm building a community. Affordable housing for working families, a public green space, a community support center." She then turned, her expression softening, and looked directly at Jack. "And a dedicated wing for veteran support services, a place for men and women like you, who were promised one thing and given another." Jack was floored. He could only stare at her. That's a good thing, Emily. That's a fine memorial." "It's not a memorial, Jack," she said. "It's a future, but I can't do it alone. It's a massive project. I need your help. Jack, I can't do this without you. I need someone to run this site, someone to manage the redevelopment, the maintenance, the security, someone who already knows this place, who knows its bones, someone who knows how to keep things working, how to build something from nothing, how to keep people safe." She took a step closer. "I need someone I trust, Jack." Jack's heart hammered. He looked down at his worn, dirty clothes. "Emily, I'm a homeless man. I don't know anything about—" "Stop," she interrupted, her voice firm but full of kindness. "Don't you dare say that. I am not offering you charity, Jack. I'm offering you a job." She touched his arm. "I will never forget that night in the alley or in this office. I'm an activist. I'm used to talking, to fighting with words. But when we were in real danger, when I was freezing and falling apart, you were in command. You were calm. You were a soldier. You built a fire. You secured the perimeter. You managed the crisis. You protected me. That is the man I want managing this property. I am offering Sergeant Jack Sawyer the position of head of management and maintenance for the Chesapeake Community Project." Jack looked at her, and for the first time in years, he felt a sharp, burning sensation behind his eyes. He saw the respect in her face. It was not pity. It was a job offer from one professional to another. He had been a ghost for so long. He had forgotten what it felt like to be seen. He cleared his throat, the words thick and unfamiliar. "Ah, yes, I accept." 6 months later, the Chesapeake Steel Works was unrecognizable. The howl of the wind through broken steel had been replaced by the roaring of bulldozers, the whine of saws, and the shouts of construction crew. The rusted, dangerous sections were coming down, but the core of the old mill, the strong brick foundations and structures, were being preserved, integrated into the new design. It was no longer a monument to a dead industry, but a phoenix rising from the ashes of poison and lies. Jack Sawyer stood at the window of his new office, which had once been a cold, dark security room. It was now bright and clean, with fresh drywall, a coat of pale yellow paint, and a large blueprint of the new community complex spread across his desk. He wore a clean navy blue work shirt with a small, embroidered patch on the breast that read Chesapeake Community. He was leaner, his face still weathered, but the deep, haunted lines of despair around his eyes were gone. His hair was shorter, the silver at his temples a mark of distinction, not decay. Next to the blueprint, pinned to a corkboard, was a child's drawing from the wooden box. The stick figures labeled Daddy and me, past and future, side by side. A sound came from the door, a soft click of nails on the new tile floor. Bear padded in. His black and tan coat was thick and brushed, gleaming with health. He walked to Jack and rested his heavy head on his hand, his intelligent eyes looking up contentedly. "Time for our walk, boy," Jack murmured, scratching the dog's ears. He looked down at his partner, the one constant, the cold anchor that had become his warm, living compass. The dog who had found a hidden wall, and, in doing so, had found a future for them both. Their apartment, one of the first units completed, was on the second floor of the newly renovated administrative building. It was small, just 2 rooms, but it had heat that worked, a refrigerator full of food, and a clean, soft bed. It was a home. They walked out into the late afternoon sun, the air carrying the scent of sawdust and fresh paint instead of decay. Jack looked up at the framework of a new community center rising from the skeleton of the old foundry. He thought of John Finch, the man who had dreamed this place into being. He thought of Mikey, the friend whose memory he had finally honored not by dwelling in the past, but by fighting for someone else's future. He was no longer a ghost. He had a mission. He had a home. He had a purpose that used every hard-learned skill from his past, the discipline, the resilience, the ability to lead and protect, and directed it toward building, not destroying. A group of construction workers waved him, and he waved back. He was no longer an outsider looking in. He was part of the crew. He was a man who made things work. Young Marcus, the worker he'd shown how to brace the doorframe, approached him. "Sergeant Jack, we're pouring the foundation for the veterans' wing tomorrow. Wanted to double-check the specs with you." Jack nodded, pulling the folded plans from his back pocket. "Let's walk through it." As he and Bear walked the perimeter of the bustling site, checking on progress, Jack felt a profound and lasting peace settle over him. It wasn't the absence of conflict, but the presence of meaning. The heavy weight of the metal box was gone, replaced by the solid heft of a hammer and the satisfying unrolling of a blueprint. The silence of the deserted mill was now filled with the sounds of life and rebuilding. Bear trotted faithfully at his side, his tail held high, no longer a shield against the world but a companion exploring it. He had his own designated bed in the office and was a beloved mascot to everyone on site. The story of the homeless veteran and his dog, the storage unit, and the fallen Titan had become local legend. But for Jack, it was simply the path that had led him here, to this place, to this moment, to this peace. He stopped at the highest point of the site, looking out over the river and the city skyline. The late sun glinted off the windows of the new buildings, including the one that had once borne the name Croft. That name was gone now, scrubbed from the city's stone, a testament to the fact that no lie, no matter how powerful, can bury the truth forever. Bear leaned against his leg, a solid, warm pressure. Jack placed a hand on the dog's head. "Good boy," he said, the simple words carrying the weight of a lifetime of gratitude. Bear's tail wagged once, a slow, certain sweep through the air. If stories like this touch your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Bonds Unspoken. Every click helps us share more incredible moments that celebrate the bond between humans and animals. And be sure to turn on the notification bell. so you never miss a story that reminds us what true loyalty feels like.